Hey, America, world, universe. Hope everyone's having a great day. Andrew Thomas Comward here. Go to presidentuniverse.com. Check out the updates. I'm going to read you from this book, The Time Traveler's Guide to Medieval England, a handbook for visitors to the 14th century. Okay. The largest English towns in 1377. I'm just going to read the top 10. London, York, Bristol, Coventry, Norwich, Lincoln, Salisbury, Lynn, Colchester, Boston, and that's number 10, Boston. Okay. Given the noise and the textures of the place, you may be surprised to learn how few people actually live in the greater towns and cities of England. In 1377, the walls of the Exeter encircle 600 or 700 houses, where about 2,600 citizens live. But that makes it the 24th largest community in the whole kingdom. Only the very largest, London, with more than 40,000 inhabitants, can properly be called a great city when compared to the largest continental cities of Bruges, Ghent, Paris, Venice, Florence, and Rome, all of which have in excess of 50,000. However, do not be misled into thinking that towns like Exeter are small, quiet places. The inns add considerably to the total, albeit on a continually shifting basis. Travelers of all sorts, clergymen, merchants, messengers, king's officers, judges, clerks, master masons, carpenters, painters, pilgrims, itinerant preachers, and musicians are to be found every day in a town. So I'm just going to end right there on that part of the book. Elegant churches still dominate their valley settings. Likewise, although most castles in England are situated within or adjacent to towns, a few do stand in rural areas, guarding roads and harbors. Sir Edward Dalrympe's new fortress at Bodiam in Sussex is a good example. So are the Pomeroy family's castle at Bury in Devon, and the Talbot family's seat at Goodrich in Hertfordshire. You may also notice the open tin mining in the southwest, where deep scars in the hillsides attest to the quarrying and washing of mineral ore, or the vast fish ponds situated on the estates of the great monasteries. For the sake of advising the would-be visitor, perhaps there is just one other essential thing to say. Not all of rural England is the same. In some of the hilly regions, it is not possible to use wheeled transport. This means that the character of the landscape is altogether different from lowland England. Building materials are gathered from the immediate vicinity. Being prone to heavy rainfall and poor for arable farming, the Mainers have far lower populations. Many abandoned settlements are to be found in these regions after the Great Plague. Also, being poor and relatively isolated, these Mainers are normally ignored by their lords, so they do not attract the best master masons to rebuild their churches or manorial buildings. And the structures that are erected are often provincial in character and amateurish in execution. At the other extreme, areas of East Anglia are very flat and fertile, and thus rich. They are also relatively safe, unlike rural areas bordering on Scotland and Wales. Okay, let's go to the next part. Okay, this goes over the social hierarchy. Okay. Social hierarchy. You see the Masons right there? Lawyers, master masons. I'll read it to you. It goes dukes, earls, barons, knights, esquires and gentlemen, franklins, yeomen, husband or freemen, villeins, unfree, and domestic servants. Okay. And then the daily wages of hired workers. See the Masons? Right there. Okay. So that's all for that book. Go to presidentuniverse.com. Okay. I'm just going to read you quickly a little connection to the Masons. This is connected to the Inn of Courts, the Inn of Chancery, which is connected to our court system in America. Okay. The Knights Templar. See Inns of Court Temple. Okay. Okay. The Inns of Court. At about the same time as students were congregating in Oxford to study the laws of the church, practitioners of the common law began to gather together in London, where the principal royal courts usually sat. Some young aristocrats aimed to acquire only a smattering of legal knowledge and a useful network of friends before returning to their family estates, equipped to check legal documents and preside over local courts. Years later, if they decided to come to one of the Chaucier's readings, they might well have been reminded of the municipal who had been part of their lives when they were young men, enjoying a not too onerous life in the temple. Others settled in for a long course, aiming for a place in the royal household, the medieval version of the civil service. Okay, the civil service. There were and are still 4 inns of court: Gray's, Lincoln's, and the Inner and Middle Temples. An inn in Chaucier's time could mean a hostelry, such as the tabard, but it had another meaning apparent if you look at the map of London: a residence including its grounds and its outbuildings, all owned and occupied by the same family. In 1287, a famous lawyer, Henry de Lacy, Earl of Lincoln, gathered around him a collection of pupils studying the common law under him. His inn lay at the north end of what became Chancery Lane, but to accommodate his students, he also used the adjacent buildings abandoned by the Black Friars, who had moved to new premises near the river. The friars had been great gardeners, and their grounds included a fertile garden and orchards. Henry de Lacy died in 1311. Despite 1 or 2 legal hiccups, the property remained the property of the Earls of Lincoln, and the law students remained there as lodgers, and tenants. In the early 1300s, another lawyer named de Grey came down from Chester to settle in London, probably bringing with him his clerks and some fellow lawyers. By 1330, his inn, just north of Holborn, was home during the law terms to several law students. It included gardens, a dove house to provide food throughout the year, and a windmill. The spelling had changed from Grey, Grey, to Gray, Gray, by 1397 or earlier. Some doubt and friendly rivalry exists as to which of the 2 Grays or Lincolns was the earlier legal training ground, but in the absence of any written proof on this crucial matter, neither side can win. The 2 temples pose a conundrum. Were they originally one, which at some time split into 2, or were they always separate entities? The order of the Knights of the Temple of Solomon, the Knights Templar, had been founded in 1119 to protect pilgrims visiting the Holy Land. It flourished in the countries that had been produced the crusading movement, particularly France. It became rich through religious donations and by acting as bankers to traders and pilgrims to the Middle East and Far East. In London, the order acquired a vast site between the river and Fleet Street. Their church still exists, though much battered by time, restorers, and the Blitz. It is round, and as the Templars' churches always were, echoing the layout of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It was the heart of an extensive complex of buildings, including a hall which housed not only the Templars' religious life, but their flourishing international banking business. There were numerous lay brothers and domestic staff who used the unconsecrated buildings at the eastern end of the site, which included another hall. But the Crusades failed to liberate the Holy Land from the Saracens. That's the Muslims. The energy of the crusading movement lapsed, and the Templars lost their function. Their wealth attracted the rapacity of the monarchs wherever they were based. In 1307, the French king, who who badly needed funds at the time, accused the order of religious and sexual misconduct, a pretext serving as an excuse to dissolve it. Its fate was sealed. Its wealth fell into the hands of the French monarchy. Other monarchs followed suit. In England, the crown dissolved the order in 1312. In a complicated deal between the Pope and the crown, the Templars' estates in England, including the Thames site, were given or sold to another order, the Knights Hospitaller of St. John of Jerusalem, which had been founded to give medical care to pilgrims to the Holy Land. The Hospitallers were quite happy in their headquarters out at Clerkenwell, so they used the windfall of the temple site to produce income by letting it to lawyers. By 1339, more lawyers had moved into the former Templar buildings as rent-paying tenants, conveniently near the royal courts, now settled permanently in Westminster. Meetings, moots, mock trials, and lectures were integral parts of legal training for which large halls were needed, and it seems likely that one group of lawyers settled around the temple church in the inner part of the temple, using the hall there, and another group used the hall in the eastern part of the site, which became known as the Middle Temple. So there was probably never just one temple of lawyers, which split it into two. But the jury is still out. An obvious question: was there ever an outer temple? It seems not. There is some evidence, but very faint, that Chaucer may have been a student in the inner temple at some point between 1360 and 1368. It depends on several leapfrogs of time. In 1598, a respected Tudor scholar, Thomas Spegd, was writing a life of Chaucer. He mentioned that William Buckley, a master of the inner temple and keeper of its records in the 1560s and 1570s, had not many years hence since seen a record of Geoffrey Chaucer, having been fined 2 shillings by the inner temple for beating a Franciscan friar in Fleet Street. The records of 1360 would have been available to Buckley, though unfortunately lost to us. But this evidence would hardly stand up in a court of law. One benefit of legal education, which I fear you may have noticed, is an ability to obfuscate a perfectly simple question: the exact rights of the lawyers to their chambers in the temple, surely a matter needing no clarification as between lawyers, were not defined until the crown brought any discussion to an abrupt end by seizing the land at the Reformation. But one tragic event was all too clear. In 1381, the rebellious peasants were convinced that lawyers and all their works had contributed to their woes and should be exterminated. They erupted into the temple and seized all the books, rolls, and remembrances kept in the cupboards of the apprentices of the law within the temple, carried them into the high road, and burned them there. Anyone who even looked like a lawyer was killed. That's sad. Someone must have known of the part of the Hospitallers played as landlords to the lawyers in the temple, since some of the rebels went out in Hospitallers' priory in the Clerkenwell and burned down the master's house. What a book. Okay. So that should tell you a lot. Everything you need to know. And I don't condone anything in this book. I'm just reading it directly from a book. The Chaucer's people, everyday lives in the Middle Ages. Some crazy people in here too. Okay. And then I'm going to finish with this one. Making England English. The knowledge of past events forms a main distinction between brutes and rational creatures, for brutes do not know about their origins, their race, and the events and happenings in their native lands. They're talking about us, okay? Americans have an annual holiday to mark when their nation began. The English have largely forgotten how theirs did. English history conventionally began with the Romans, and English kings were named and numbered only from the Norman conquest onwards. The period between the Romans and the Normans has pretty much vanished from popular remembrance, largely ignored in the classroom, and, with the exception of King Arthur, whoever he was, apparently of no interest to the makers of movies. Yet the Anglo-Saxon, what about when they pulled the sword out? There's a movie about that. Yet the Anglo-Saxon centuries established the basic institutions that have, is it Camelot? No. Have shaped the nation's life ever since, its language and its laws, its religion and its monarchy. From pennies and parishes to acres and aldermen, the Anglo-Saxon imprint still survives today. Traditionally, school history ignored the ancient Britons, even though they were here first. DNA analysis now implies that they never went away, and that a far higher proportion of today's population than was ever imagined may be in fact descended from them. Successive influences of Jews, Flemings, Dutch, Huguenots, Italians, Germans, and Irish were likewise overlooked. Henrietta's Marshals, our island story, told how England's makeup was reduced by successive invasions Roman, Anglo Saxon, Viking, and Norman, but each was quite different from the others, both in its character and its effects. What is this place called? The first known account of the British Isles was written by Pytheas of Marseilles, a Greek in the late 4th century. He called its people Brittany, probably meaning painted people. Caesar and later Latin authors wrote this as Brittany, hence Britannia for their home and the name of the new province. All right. I just read from these 3 books. Okay. Masons have been around for a long time, as you can see. They got paid pretty well. Okay. Love you, America. Go to PresidentUniverse.com. Have a great day. Miller, Madison, Colette, Quinn. Thanks for teaching Daddy how to win. I love you, 4 girls. I miss you. I can't wait to see you. Have a good day.